talking about a topic that's near and dear to, I think, all of us. And I think we can confirm that there is a future in retirement. We're starting to see a lot of, not starting, but we've been seeing a lot of activity in the last couple of years around reform at the state and local level. We're going to walk through that. And also the environment that we're kind of living in today in the retirement world. So we start out with a quote from Scrooge. I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but basically it goes to what path are we going to follow, and is there ability to change that path as we go forward. So these are the things that we're going to hit on this morning, just to give you an idea of what our agenda is. You know, setting the stage, the pension environment we're in, pension plan reform, and we put that in quotes, and the future. And of course, we have perfect vision going forward, so we're going to be able to tell you exactly what's going to happen. Okay.
No, does it not work? There we go.
No, it didn't go forward. There we go. No, it went too far forward. Here, okay. So this is the environment. When I was thinking about how to go through this without going into every single detail, I started to just put groups together that are having influence on the retirement discussion, and not only at the public sector level, but also at the private sector and Taft-Hartley world. I mean, there's reform going on everywhere. So we have the accountants and the actuaries, and yes, we admit I don't have those initials after my name, but Rocky does, and yes, he is an actuary and a very good one.
That's why the future we look at later is grounded in absolute fact by an actuary. So I have my crystal ball, and it works.
We're seeing a lot of discussion from what I would call the number crunchers, and they have associations just like you do that are looking at this issue of sustainability of plans, the ability to make the promise and keep it. And we've seen the American Association of Actuaries. They actually have a project that's going on right now called AGES, where they're looking at types of design that can be sustainable. You have the Society of Actuaries, who actually came out with a paper recently, which we weren't too pleased with, and we've had some discussions with them about it. And coming out later this month, the Conference of Consulting Actuaries, where the public actuaries have found a home, are coming out with a paper around funding. And I think you're going to find it, and actuaries that work in the public sector are going to find it very helpful going forward. So there's a lot of activity there. Part of what's happening in a lot of the papers that you see coming out from different aspects of the pension community is everyone wants to make sure that they're not the entity at fault if something goes wrong. So you see the bond rating agencies, Moody's in particular, has come up with a new way to measure pension liability. And they're using that particular measure as a hammer for going to entities and saying, if you don't report your pension in this way, then there's a potential for your credit rating to be questioned and possibly reduced. And they have done that in the state of Rhode Island. We're in the city of Chicago. They have done it here as well. So clearly they're looking at ways to wear both belts and suspenders. And I think the rating agencies have come out under a lot of criticism since 2007 about how they set ratings, and this is a reaction to that. The exhaustion theory, these are the folks that run numbers that we have a lot of issues with, and I call it the exhaustion theory because what they do is they run the pension obligation, the liability, but what they don't do is factor in any additional contributions or investment earnings. So it's like you plumped a big pot of money into your checking account and you just keep writing checks and there's never a direct deposit that goes in. You only have money going out. So it's very questionable math on how these numbers are being devised. And of course you have the the nightly news and the investigative reporter who's looking for that Pulitzer Prize, and he thinks that, or she thinks that they found it if they report on the pension, let me use the word, crisis, which we're not so sure exists. Here's the real issue. The real issue in America is that there are millions of people who have not saved a retirement. The issue we should be talking about is retirement adequacy, and NCPERS is to be commended because you are having that conversation with your secure choice pension that you've been discussing around the country, and a number of states are looking at right now as an option for the private sector. We have people who just are not saving, will not be ready for retirement. And basically, we also know that where you get the most interaction on retirement or the most participation on retirement is if it's offered through the workplace. And this just is a national number that shows you in the public and the private sector in comparison the number of workers that have even access to an employer-based program. So you can see that adequacy and the deficit for retirement savings is a huge number. $8 to $12 trillion has been the estimate. Well, what are some of those voices out there that we've been hearing and have concern about? There's a new divide and conquer strategy that's going on in this pension debate, and it's really being led by the Arnold Foundation and other foundations, but they're funneling their support, and by that I mean their money, through the Pew Center for the States. And Pew has put out a number of papers, has held a number of conferences around the issue of sustainability of public pensions. They've gone into several states and suggested a certain type of reform, which may or may not be sustainable when you actually break it apart, and certainly is not able to provide the level of replacement that's necessary for individuals. They use riskless discount rates. Do you ever hear of a riskless discount rate? Isn't that a wonderful term? I don't know where you find that, but what they mean by that is your discount rate. So they're using, instead of the 7 to 8% that we use in the public sector, they're using a 4 to 5%. And you know when you do the math, if you use a lower discount rate, the liabilities shoot up. And so this is the discussion that they have brought so far in trying to convince particularly state legislators to make changes to their plans. And they have been successful in the state of Kentucky in this endeavor. But they're going on a new track now, and when I call it divide and conquer, there's now a discussion that they are putting forward which has to do with wealth accumulation. Wealth accumulation is a term you hear in the defined contribution community. It's that creation of a balance over time, employer-employee contributions, and the interest earned on that account. That's wealth accumulation. In a defined benefit plan, that is not a concept we use. Defined benefit plan is a shared risk program. It's basically, when you think about it, it's like insurance. So now you have these studies that are coming out that are going to pit younger workers, because the benefit doesn't really accrue till you're later in your career, and you know what that benefit is going to be, against older workers who have accumulated, if you will, a defined benefit. And this is really very concerning. And they're using several arguments around this. One, they're actually saying that defined benefit plans are a detriment to teacher quality because they keep teachers in the classroom. Okay, just throwing it out there. So that's one of the arguments. The other argument is young people get a bad deal in a DB plan, particularly if they leave. So that's going to be an argument against DB plans that you're going to hear. And that they're unsustainable. They're very difficult to understand. I had a conversation with one of the folks over at Pew, and I said, I think it's kind of, I don't know, 5th grade math. You know, it's the number of years times a percentage times a dollar amount. Gee whiz, that's hard math. So You know, there's arguments out there that you're going to...
They use the word percentage. That threw them.
A percentage.
Yeah, they don't like percentage.
Oh, you had to do fractions. I guess that's really hard.
Fractions.
Division, you know. So that's the kind of arguments we're going to hear. Even more concerning, the Arnold Foundation and the Koch brothers Foundation are sponsoring a judicial symposium with the George Mason University in Virginia around the crisis in public pension plans. These are the individuals. It's a all expense paid trip to Charleston, South Carolina for this conference for individuals sitting on the bench, both federal and state, where your lawsuits possibly could wind up. These are the individuals that might be making very critical decisions around public pensions. I think that might be of concern for all of us. But this group is well financed, they're organized, and they're coming after us. They're already here. I'm going to kind of move through these next set of slides pretty quickly because we want to get to the discussion of future and what the plan designs are going to look at. But we all know that defined benefit plans do contribute to the economy, you know, about $1 trillion a year. When the dollars come out of these plans, they don't sit in a mattress. People are utilizing those dollars in the economy. So DB plans are an economic engine.
If I may here, Kate, this is the discussion that's not being held at the Pew level. Because remember, the Pew folks, the Arnold Foundation, a lot of that is to protect corporate interest in America. I want you to look at the numbers on page 7. Corporate interest in America, total economic impact of the retirement plans is almost $1 trillion in the U.S. on an annual basis. It supports 6.5 million jobs. And for every dollar you contribute, you get about almost $9 back in economic impact. If you stop these plans, this economic impact dries up, and that creates a bigger problem than you want to even imagine. In some states, we heard about a state on Monday, that roughly 25% of the population in that state is somehow economically tied to the retirement system for the state. And that's not particularly unusual, so keep that in mind when these guys try to dismantle the impact. It is straight to the bottom line of not just your members, but the corporations and the businesses into your area also.
Yeah, this is just, we put a state map into your materials, but just for the state of Illinois, since we're sitting here, it's $19 billion coming from pension funds and created about 127,000 jobs. So again, those are the real, and these are information from the National Institute of Retirement Security.
Earlier you saw now everyone in the press talks about how poorly funded public sector plans are and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars that we're going to have to make up over the future. I want to contrast that with the private sector. The private sector pension deficit is only something in the neighborhood of $8 to $14 trillion. Drop in the bucket compared to the problem on the public sector side, right? The problem is they've got their focus on the wrong thing. The average retirement savings is about $25,000 to $50,000. Over half, maybe a little less than half, of all working Americans have zero saved, nothing. What that means, and we did a study for a large Midwestern state, a person is working, making $45,000, $50,000 a year, pretty good money, not bad. When they hit 65 and go to retire, they only have Social Security, which means their income will drop from around $50,000 a year to around $20,000 a year, which means they will now be eligible for many of the social programs the cities, the counties, and the states afford. Somebody's going to pay for it now or pay for it later. So that's what some of these numbers are just indicating.
What we calculated for this state was that if nothing is done about the private sector employees in their state not having retirement savings, that their Medicaid costs could increase by up to $750 million a year. So if they even put in a very basic plan, a 3% savings plan, that they could cut their costs by that amount in Medicaid. And that's the fastest growing part of any state's budget, is the Medicaid cost. So everything's connected when you talk about pensions. So pension plan reform, you know, are there problems? Absolutely. There are problems, and we've been addressing them. And the discussion is really about balancing risk and cost. And I have them really very equal on this seesaw because they are. It sounds odd, and it may sound odd to you, that it's not all about the dollars. It is about the concept of risk and who should bear it. And even well-funded plans around the country have looked at making reductions because they're afraid of future risk. So that, you know, when we think about this, we think that risk is a larger driver than the actual cost. And when we've looked at making changes to plans, these are the principles we use. We call them secure. You've seen them in a whole different, probably different formats around the country, but it's stable contributions, it's equalizing risk, it's committed funding, it's universal coverage, it's replacement that's adequate, and its efficiency and transparency. And I know that very often you're sitting in a situation which is a political pressure cooker. It's really nice to have high ideals. Sometimes you're just fighting for your life. But if you can get people to sit back and actually have a discussion about those principles and what do you want to accomplish with this plan and the changes that you're making, you can have a very different outcome. These are the types of changes that have been going on. They're really driven by this sustainability or reduction of risk. You'll hear the term de-risking very often in these discussions. And what we've seen around the country, clearly changes in COLA, changes in eligibility, retirement age increases, and some new designs in hybrids and defined contribution plans. But really, when you look at the changes, there has not been a state, there's been some localities, but there's not been a state that have moved all the way to a defined contribution plan. Generally, they're looking at some form of a reduced benefit under the DB plan and an enhanced benefit under the defined contribution aspect.
Let me interject one thing here also. The move, you hear a lot of plans with defined contribution plans are going that direction. The new buzzword these days is to have the defined contribution plan have mandatory annuitization or some sort of demand for annuitization at retirement. So think about that for a second. You put contributions into a plan, it develops up to retirement, then you have a guaranteed benefit for the rest of your life. That sounds a lot like a DB plan, does it not? But anyway, just a thought.
Yeah, Rocky's absolutely right. On the defined contribution side, you're seeing forms of DB aspects melted into them, stirred into them to make them a retirement long-term benefit as opposed to a lump sum distribution. So what do these changes mean? And there's been a lot of criticism about, oh, the changes that have been made, they're going to take a long time. Well, yeah, it's a defined benefit plan. The crash in the market is not something you're going to overcome by a few years of good returns. You know that your liabilities are still there. They might not be growing as fast as they were, but they're still there. And so what do the changes mean? You know, how can you assess long term? So the Center for Retirement Research looked at a number of plans, a sample, 32 state plans, and basically what they found is that the changes that have been made are meaningful and that they're going to have an impact on state budgets going forward. So you can see the percentage of state budgets that have been spent on pension contributions. These are not the payouts, these are not the benefits, because that comes from the trust, but this is the contribution to fund the plans, roughly at 6.5%. And you can see that starting to drop down based on the changes that have already been made. I think this chart also demonstrates how very often you hear that pension plans are the reason why governments are having such a difficult time. And that's, if it's 6 to 4% of the budget at the state level, that's not the reason. There's a whole range of other reasons that states have been having difficulty, and other expenditures that are growing way faster and not declining, and aren't going to decline going forward. What have other countries done? So just very quickly, there's a number of reform. The US is not the only country that's dealing with changes in their pensions. The aging of the maybe universe in a lot of developed countries, we're all in the same situation. So you have Australia. I want to make a point about these plans. I'm not going to go through each and every one of them. You've got it here. But what's common about them is that they're all based on a more robust national program than Social Security. These are all kind of layered on. For example, in the Netherlands, they have a Social Security program, a national program. They have employer-based defined benefit plans, and now they have a national defined contribution plan as well. So it really is the three-legged stool going forward. And you can see the replacement rate in the Netherlands is 89%. So it's a very robust program that they've put together. The other thing about the Dutch program is that if they need to reduce benefits, they can. That is part of the program. And they recently had to do that because of the downturn. So they did not increase the benefits. There was no cost of living increase over the last couple of years. But that's part of the program. Everybody understood it going forward. Britain put in a program called NEST. It's relatively new, and it is an enhancement to the national program, plus you can have employer-based pensions, although there are not as many in the UK as there used to be, and this new program. And you'll notice that there's a government contribution to this plan, as well as employer and employee. So the government is backing it, and it's been very, very popular. And it's only been in place, I think it's 3 years now. So those are some of the changes and thinking that are going on in other countries. Very much like ours, understanding that people need to save for retirement. You don't want to get to the destination of retirement without enough money. The other aspect, of course, that we're not talking about here is working in retirement. This has certainly become an issue and an approach to keeping income coming in, although maybe at a reduced rate. So that's another, it's almost the fourth leg of the stool. It's not quite as long as the other two legs, but it's certainly being used as a way of providing income in retirement.
So in the discussion today, you've seen the word pension reform, and you've seen reform in quotes. And why would we do that? The issue is many times the word pension reform, the words pension reform, is really a secret code for let's reduce spending so we can save the budget. It's not really pension reform as much as it is budget help and assistance. If an entity, however, and there are legitimate reasons for looking at pension reform. We are living longer. There are many more of us in old age. The economy is not what it was 20 years ago. There are lots of issues that would justify looking at the pension plans and reviewing them. On page 18, we suggest some steps that are helpful in reviewing the plan. The first step, make sure you invite everyone to the table. This includes, of course, the elected officials are going to come to the table whether you want them to or not. So they're going to show up. But governmental staff needs to be there, the ones that actually do the hiring and firing and try to man the mission of the city. The employee groups need to be there. They have the pulse of the actual participants in the plan, and they want to be a part of that. The other element that we've seen some strong success in is interested community and corporate elements. At the end of the day, much of the income from the city is from the taxpayer base, either the corporate or the individual taxpayers, and you should have them part of that discussion rather than sniping at you from the outside. Eliminate preconceived notions. We had one large city that was going through a reform, and the mayor of that particular city came to the table, and he had the solution. We completely do away with the pension plan and go to a 100% DC plan, and that's the answer. Well, after about 18 months of discussion and education and training, the mayor backed off from that completely, and the city ended up adopting a hybrid program with a base DB plan in DC. But you have to eliminate your preconceived notions and come into it and look at all of the options that are out there. And there are a host of options out there today. And then you have to balance. This whole thing is about balance, objectives, budget, mission, what the employees really need and want. And then another point is to avoid time frames that are unrealistic. At a different city, mayor was elected, set up a task force in September, and said he wanted answers by December. Well, for a complicated issue like this, that's not enough time. And so it makes it very, very difficult to get thoughtful, reasonable answers. Their goal might not have been to get thoughtful, reasonable answers, but that's editorial comment. Lastly, I should have read that one first. Avoid personal attacks. Keep it professional. Focus on the actual facts and not conceptions of what you might have in mind. In the process of doing this, and we have done this all over the country with many, many different systems. And let me point out to you some problems. One, we had a situation, we had a city council. They wanted to come and make pension reforms because they were scared to death of their defined benefit plan. The defined benefit plan was going to bankrupt the city. Let me describe this plan to you. They were 85% funded, had a contribution rate of about 10.5%, no employee contributions in the plan at all. It was a 2% multiplier with age 65 retirement. And the contribution rate had not changed much in 10 years, even with 2008. And yet that plan was going to bankrupt the city. So you could not convince the city council of anything except the DC plan had to be the way to go. So to save money for the city, they froze the 10% of pay DB plan and put in a 15% of pay DC plan. And they saved the city and saved the budget. Another situation we worked with, the unions who thought they were part of the process ended up being excluded from the process. And so at the end of the day, the city fathers put forth a proposal that the unions had not seen or heard of before, and then it was all HE double toothpicks broke loose. So bring everyone in. Another situation, the actuary, we can only work with what you tell us. So if you choose to not tell us all the facts, then you will get something that's not quite the epitome of good work. And so another situation, they decided to keep some information from the actuary, and that did not work out well. You want to worry about dueling actuaries. You get your Arnold Foundation actuary and your plan actuary, and that can be quite interesting. But do work at arriving at consensus. Also, you have these busybodies that come in from the outside that are experts. They had 2 semesters of accounting, and suddenly they know everything about pensions, so they can tell your city council how it's supposed to run. That's a problem we want to work about. So, but these are issues you have to avoid and look at. So work through these things.
So an eye towards the future. And so we have Alice in Wonderland here. And again, this is choosing the path, what path to choose as you go forward.
I really like this one, Cathie.
Or Yogi Berra's quote.
Yogi Berra's quote?
When you get to the fork in the road, take it.
That's right. Yeah, you get to the fork in the road. So where are you going? I don't know. So pick either one. Doesn't matter. So we don't have a direction, we're in trouble.
The country has been talking about pension and aging for a long time, going back to 1980, the Carter administration's first report on aging in America. That report really did highlight some of the issues that we're even talking about today, which is being prepared for retirement and how do individuals do that. And you can remember back in 1980, you probably had a lot more corporate defined benefit plans than you have today. They've really started to disappear starting right around that time when 401k plans were put into the federal tax code, which were never meant to be the primary retirement vehicle for an employer, but a supplemental, but that's not what we see today. So there was discussion of the three-legged stool, and this is actually a concept when we were working on the Secure Choice Plan with Hank. This is exactly the concept that we were all focused on, which was Social Security, and I know that some of you are not in it, but remember Secure Choice is aimed at the private sector where most people are. And if you're not in Social Security, I know this might sound blasphemous, but if you're doing reform, you might want to look at that program as part of the reform. Pensions, and I use the word pension, not retirement plan, because a pension plan is a different animal. A 401k is a retirement vehicle. A defined benefit plan is a pension. It is something that is an annuity and it's lifetime. And then your personal savings is the other part. And we know that from studies at a minimum adequacy of replacement, and this changes in range based on your income level, but on average 80% is a relatively good goal. If you're a lower income person, the percentage goes up. If you're a higher income person, the percentage goes down.
Let me add something, Cathie, because you said something very, very important there, I thought, because even if you're not in Social Security, if you're looking at pension reform, you need to bring Social Security into the discussion. Whether or not you get into Social Security, it has to be part of the discussion so you compare apples to apples to the folks that are in Social Security with your situation. If all they're doing is slicing and dicing your plan and you're not in Social Security, you're actually worse off than the people around you. So bring that into the discussion.
So let's talk about some options, and Rocky's going to walk us through a couple.
Okay. We're at a crossroads in the country to a certain extent, and like Alice, we're trying to figure out which path to go down. And also, like Scrooge, is this the path that's guaranteed to the future, or is it a possibility that it will change? What I want to describe to you on page 24 is if we continue down the current path, and the current path being one, there is no direction, there is no policy, there is no national goal for retirement. We don't really know where we're headed. All we know is that from day to day, we need to make changes and affect things. So what will be the impact on America and its economy if we continue to gut retirement programs? And in that phrase, I say retirement programs, not just DB plans. On the corporate side, they moved to DC plans, and now they've cut their DC contributions out so that many corporations do not fund anything at all for retirement. It's all on the employee's back. So when we say cut retirement, this is not just DB, this is all retirement. First thing you'll notice that might happen, if people can't retire, what will they do? They'll keep working. Imagine everyone from age 60 to 70 continuing to work. What will that do to the unemployment rate? It would go from 7% to something a good bit higher. So if the young folks, we talked about earlier, that the DB plan is hurting the young folks because they're having to pay for something they might never get, what happens if they don't have a job because the older folks won't go home at the end of the day? Well, the second thing that might happen is the housing market will probably suffer. If you're 24, 25, 26 years old, trying to start a family, and you don't have a job, you cannot buy a house. So that will be another piece of the pie that will hurt the economy. Since these new entrants, of course, don't have jobs, they will live at home longer. Maybe you have some kids that live at home now. Okay, I don't know. I've got one that, we're hoping she'll leave in September. I think that's the plan. But again, it's one thing to allow them to stay and help them out. It's another thing to be forced into it by the economy. Higher education is likely to decline. Why spend $50,000 to $100,000 for a college education not to get a job? That seems like a very poor investment, and I'm not an investment person, but it doesn't seem like a good thing. Retiree medical and Medicare will be reduced down the road. There's already discussions in Congress about reducing some of these things. And since savings for retirement has already been cut, savings for retiree medical will not be very much either. Now, if you cut down medical coverage for older people, there is a silver lining there, right? If they don't get good medical coverage, they won't live as long. That will help funding of the pension plans.
Funding by attrition.
There you go. Here's another impact. I'm sure some of you have read this in recent years, but as retirement funding for private sector workers has been gutted and declined, the pension offerings, the golden parachutes for the executives in some of these corporations have skyrocketed. There are certain cities and areas in the country where the difference in wage disparity between the high paid and the low paid is as high as it's been in probably 100 years. And the likelihood is if we continue down the same path we are on, it is likely to get worse and worse. If this sounds like gloom and doom, yes, it is. This is that ugly ghost of Christmas future shrouded in black, pointing at Scrooge's grave and telling him that's where you're headed. This is the path we are following. We are tyrannized by the pressure of the immediate to make short-term, shallow reactions to what is really a very long-term and intricate problem. Now, is there another path? The answer is yes, there is. The other path is revive the dual concepts of adequacy and balance. Do not remove adequacy from the discussion. Understand that short-term gain can be very long-term pain. Inadequate retirement will have significant repercussions in many unrelated areas of the economy. Inadequate retirement has a possibility of impacting all of the economy of the U.S. Future retirement arrangements will have to be flexible with benefits. If the markets go south like they did in 2008, you can't keep drawing the same amount of money. You have to have something in there that recognizes these ups and downs and swings. It has to adjust for changing economic conditions. It has to share the readiness. And by sharing, I mean the employer can't shift it all to the employee. The employee can't just sit back and think that the employer is going to take care of them in some great paternalistic way. It has to be a shared, common decision. Recognition of increasing life expectancies. The longer we live, we have to take that into account because we weren't planning when most of your retirement systems put in for people to live on average into their mid-80s. They were exposed to die in their mid-70s. They've chosen to live longer. That creates a problem for the funding of the plans. So what are some of the stresses people have to look at? On page 27, we look at fiscal measurements. And what we're trying to do here is say, can you really sustain your plan? We had a particular group come to us and say, is this plan savable? And once you get down a slippery slope, there are some that might not be savable. And you have to start from ground zero all again. But you do have to look at these things. Is your particular entity growing? Is it declining? What's the future look like? All of these things have to be taken into account. So what do we do? In 1980, President Carter's commission, and yeah, President Carter, everybody thinks he was a pretty, suck president, right? But he did put this commission together that has some great beginnings of a national policy for retirement, which we have succeeded in ignoring over the next 30-plus years. Re-energizing this concept will assure a more secure and promising future for all of us. Other issues, part of this policy. There have been attacks on Social Security, particularly in the last 10 to 12 years, such as we've never heard of before. Changing Social Security from a DB to a DC model, all sorts of other things. Social Security is a key step in all of our retirements. Social Security must be buttressed and improved and taken care of. Changes made, yes, but not wholesale radical changes, because that would disrupt everything going on. Make the pension and retirement plan money secure. The raids the corporations did on the pension plans in the 90s and early part of the 2000s were just, they were criminal. And they had money lying there, so let's take it, take the money out of the pension plan, use it for executive compensation, and then 10 years later complain because there's no money in the pension plan, so now we have to cut the benefits. That's just not right. Get universal retirement options to help supplement Social Security. The Harkin measure in Congress is really a solid bill toward this. Secure choice that Hank has been developing around the country in different states is another way of handling that issue. And then finally, we need to really get serious about this health care issue and decide what we're going to do. It is a hard issue. It is a tough issue. It's going to take more than political sound bites and sniping at each other to get it done. That's kind of my rant this morning. Hang in there.
So what are some of the future challenges? And I think we've walked through, yes, there's reform that will be going on, will continue to go on, and keeping an open mind, looking at shared risk, has really worked in those conversations. As Rocky said, we've been in situations where an elected official or a council member just believes that defined contribution is the only way to go. Defined contribution may be part of the solution, but it's not the only piece. So you have to marry the two concepts and use adequacy as your guide, and adequacy and sustainability over time. So that's the question I always raise. Will we have strategic patience? And that's really understanding what happened, why it happened, and how not to let it happen again. What are those fixes going forward? And I think we all pretty much know what they are. We just have to have the political will and courage to put them in. I do think that the changes that are there are, as we noted, are making a change, will make a change. Will there need to be some additional reforms? Likely. But again, they should be done with patience and thoughtfulness, so as not to just completely gut the replacement that our current systems provide. This is my really gnawing question, and I think it goes to you and your membership. Will participants start to question the guarantee of the defined benefit plan? We know that we have a significant bankruptcy going on in the country, Detroit. We know that the Detroit plans are relatively well funded, but there is a bankruptcy going on. We know that the bankruptcy judge has said that the state constitutional guarantee can be overridden by the bankruptcy. That is being challenged, of course, in court, that decision. There is a deal on the table as we speak that between the retiree committee and the city that's being negotiated. And I think the outcome, regardless of what that outcome is, I think that public employees around the country are starting to really get scared. Although it's highly unlikely that an entity can go bankrupt, it's not something that happens very often. In fact, in some states, localities can't go bankrupt, and of course, no state can go bankrupt. But it's the psyche, it's the day-to-day article in the paper as to what's going on. It's the concern, will the money be there? You know, I've been promised this benefit, will I be there? By the way, my contribution just got increased, and I can't retire for 3 extra years. What's going on here? So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done with the participants in the plan. And oh, by the way, remember the Pew study that's going on, and the Urban Institute scorecard that's going to be coming out about how you're treated under a defined benefit plan as a young worker as opposed to a more mature worker. All of these things are rattling around and are going to raise concerns in the minds of the participants, and they're exactly intended to do that. Will alternatives provide enough flexibility and benefit adjustments? I think yes. I mean, I think we are actually seeing that happening. One of the things that is often, one of the allegations leveled against defined benefit plans often is that they are inflexible. Au contraire, look at the reform that has just gone on. They are extremely flexible and able to adjust to economic conditions. So I'm going to leave it there because I think we might want to do some Q&A, but these are the challenges that I think you will be facing. The other one I do want to mention is, will the ballot or the referendum take the place of legislators? What you're starting to see is where opponents of the existing plans cannot get legislation through the state legislature. They're starting to go to the ballot, to the referendum, to see if they can get changes. So far, they've not been overly successful in this approach, but it is an approach that's out there and kind of skirts the normal, if you will, legislative process. So I'm going to turn it back to Tina, and I'll see if there's any questions.
Thank you. Do we have questions? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.